prudent getteth knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeketh knowledge. I guess that verse for me, it quantifies why I think people should read in general, not just Christian books, but books in general to grow ourselves. It says the heart of the prudent getteth knowledge. So if you're a prudent person, if you're wise, then seek knowledge, want knowledge. And the best way to get knowledge is by reading books. The Bible itself is a book. And for me, my journey of reading books started. Our house is like a library. We have so many books all over the place. We've read so many books, and those, each and every single one of those books has added something to me. Whether I remember, I may not remember the book, but that book has changed something about how I live. And I guess when we're reading, we don't know how much it impacts us. If you go to your program, you'll see at the back that there's some books that women have written down. Some of the women who'll be speaking here today, books that have encouraged them. And the book I wrote down was Women as Risk Takers. That book was, I guess it was my first understanding of the church and women's role in the church. For a long time when I grew up, I thought that all churches, as a woman, you could lead, or you could be a pastor, or you could do whatever God put you in. But from reading that book, I found out that there were some churches where that wasn't the case. And I learned about how the doctrinal position of women in the church. What are we supposed to do? Who are we supposed to be in the church? And that book changed me so much. And right now, if you ask my mum, she'll tell you that I'm a passionate advocate for women's role in the church. And that book and the biblical background it gave me changed my perspective completely. So why read a book? As I've said, it grows you personally. It changes how you think, and there can be one book that you read that may just change you forever. I'm sure the Bible has all changed us forever, so that's one book that we can all say has changed us forever. But then there are books like theological books, non-fiction books, fiction books, all sorts of books. I could go on and on and on about the different genres. But I guess the most important thing when you're reading a book is, first of all, sorry about the noise. So sorry. I think the thing to think of when you're reading a book is, I guess my mum always says to me when I read a book or when I'm watching something, why are you reading this? What are you hoping to get from it? And that's the first question you need to ask yourself, whether you're reading the Bible, whether you're reading a Christian book, whether it's a non-Christian book, what is the purpose of me reading this book? So when you take up that book, you look at the book, you look through it, say to yourself, what do I want to get from this book? Because if we don't know what we want from books, we'll end up reading a lot of books, but not getting anything from it. We're not really growing. We're just reading it for entertainment purposes or just for the sake of reading. So what do you want to take from that book you're reading? And as you're reading it, write down things, underline. If you take some books that I've read or my mum has read or my sister has read, you'll see there's so many underlines or comments that have been written in where we've penciled in what we've taken from that book. And for me, it's great to receive a book that someone else has read and to see what they've underlined, because I've seen, oh, this is what that person saw. Maybe I should look more into that. So underline, write comments about what you see as you're reading that book. Third of all, as you're reading a book, don't limit what you read. I think sometimes I say to myself, I love fiction. That's like the best books for me are fiction. And there's some people who love non-fiction and those are the books they read. But I've learned not to limit myself in the genres of books that I read, especially Christian books, because for a long time, I mostly just read Christian fiction. I couldn't sit down and read Christian non-fiction. For me, it just wasn't for me. And I remember I had this conversation with my mum and she said, you need to start reading Christian non-fiction books. And she said, they'll be so helpful for you. And I said, okay, I'll read the book. And I read this book by a woman called Elizabeth George, Young Women, what's the name of the book? Is A Young Woman After God's Own Heart. And that book was such an instrumental book for me as well, in reading how to be a young woman after God's own heart. That's probably the first Christian non-fiction book that I read that interests me so much. And from that point on, I've read so many others. And those books have also interested me, have also changed my perspective on certain things. So read books that are outside of your normal genre. And then I think coming to non-Christian books, that's such a touchy subject with some Christians. Obviously, you'll hear some people who say, don't read any non-Christian books at all. But I'm not of that belief. I think with non-Christian books, we have to be careful. They can be useful, but we also have to be quite careful about the kind of non-Christian books that we read, because they can seriously harm our spiritual growth. There are some people who have read books and that's completely changed them. And I think you may have heard of a book called The Da Vinci Code. That book, you know, some people read it and they just go crazy. And so we have to be very careful when it comes, even Christian books, the kind of books that we're reading. And we have to look at these books, first of all, what is the value behind that book? What is the writer's standpoint? Are there godly morals in there? Does it use swear words, simple things like that? What is the belief of the writer themselves? Because sometimes the book can be good, but the writer themselves isn't quite as good. I remember as a child, there were these series of books I used to love by this writer called Jacqueline Wilson. And I used to love her book so much. But over time, I stopped watching them. And because they had TV series and the books as well, I stopped completely after I found out more about the writer herself. And I found out who she was and what she believed in. And even though the books themselves weren't necessarily bad, I realized that if I'm reading this for this person, they live a certain lifestyle and they've written their books, I may not notice, but I may be taking in something from what she's written that I shouldn't really be taking in. So look at the writer, look at who they are, what they believe in, make sure that their personal views align with your own personal views. I think that's also true of Christian books, because there's so many different doctrines out there, and I'll speak about that later on in another short talk I'll give. But there's so many different doctrines out there that are contrary to the Bible or even contrary to your own personal beliefs. And I think if we read and read and read and read without really researching into what it is we're reading, who we are reading about, we can take in things that we probably shouldn't be taking in. So for me, even when reading Christian books, if I see the name of an author, I'll always go online, I'll search out who's this author, what do they believe in, you know, what kind of doctrines do they put out in their books, what kind of things do they teach to other people, and then from that I can make a decision as to whether or not to read the book. I think probably to round up, I'm conscious of my time, how much time I have left. I think probably for me to round up, I would, have 3 more minutes left. So to round up for me, maybe just share a couple of the books that I think may be useful to women around here, of different ages. Probably one author that I would really point out to people is Francine Rivers. You may have heard of her. She's an amazing author. The first book I read by her, I mean, there were sometimes I laughed, I cried. It was like a whole emotional roller coaster for me. It's Christian. She writes Christian fiction predominantly, but I think the way she approaches her books is so amazing, whether it's talking about romance, whether it's talking about singleness or whatever it is, the way she approaches the books that she writes really changed my view on the Christian life, especially when it came to romance. It changed my view and my understanding of what it's supposed to be, and it helped me see the Christian journey from the perspective of other people. So I think she's a great writer. And that second one, he's dead now, but amazing writer as well, C.S. Lewis. This man was amazing. My favorite books are him, Chronicles of Narnia. I love those books so much. And he I guess he, in a way, turned Narnia into a theological book without even really meaning to. If you read about him, you'll find out he wasn't even intending to write it about the Christian experience. But over time, it turned into, all of a sudden, a lion jumped into the story, who died for Peter and Edmund, and basically mirroring Jesus and the cross. And that was his life and his beliefs pouring out into his books. So those books, Chronicles of Narnia, especially for children, and his theological books like the Screwtape Letters, such great books where he really delves into what it means to be a Christian. He asks significant life questions, philosophical questions like, what is life? What is death? What is God? And what is hell? Those kind of questions that really challenge us and help us to grow as believers. So I think I'll round up there and hand over to the next person.
Thank you, Esther. That was really a great roundup and a great way to approach reading books. I've posted some of the authors that you mentioned in there, but as Esther said, in the back of the program, there's a few more. We are going to go on to Sister Funge, talking about singleness and walking with God.